Hello there, you're watching the Press Preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we're going to be seeing what's making the headlines with Fleet Street Fox Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and Kate Andrews, news editor at the Institute of Economic Affairs. So very good evening to both of you. So let's take a look then at what's on the front pages. And the Conservative Party's internal wranglings over Brexit continue to feature. The Eye reports on what it calls Brexit Secretary David Davis's plans to become Prime Minister if Cabinet splits force Theresa May out of Downing Street. The Metro says she's fighting to keep a lid on the revolt, with a number of Cabinet members plotting against her. The Telegraph has allies of the Chancellor attacking Boris Johnson for being simple-minded, and they warn that Brexit may not happen until after the next general election. The Guardian leads with the German elections and the rise of the far-right party, the AfD, which has marred Angela Merkel's election victory. It's the same lead for The Times, saying the AfD has vowed to take back Germany when it enters Parliament. The Mail claims an exclusive about GP receptionists trying to cut doctors' workloads by sending patients to other parts of the NHS for treatment. The Mirror features a Conservative MP who it claims is unhappy at not being able to buy a Poppy Day wreath on expenses. The Star says the England football team have won a battle with FIFA over wearing poppies on their shirts, and they'll wear them when they next play Germany. While The Sun leads on a man who found an illegal immigrant hiding in the back of his van after he'd driven all the way from France to Wales. So lots of different stories to talk about there with Susie Boniface and Kate Andrews. But we're going to kick off with tonight's story that we've obviously got the exit polls tonight from Germany and the election result. There's the Daily Telegraph's take on it. Merkel triumphant, but Germany's far right stirs. And it's a very similar take from the Times and the Guardian as well.
So yes, Angela Merkel has won a fourth term as Chancellor for her party, the CDU. Unfortunately for her, it was not the win that she was expecting. The percentage of the vote that she's gained was certainly decreased from what it was last time and what they were expecting. I think two crucial points. The first is that the Social Democrats have decided not to rejoin a coalition, so it's going to be a tough slog. They're estimating potentially up till Christmas, where she's going to be having to find allies left, right, and center. The Greens may actually end up being an important point. We see that in places like Canada, the Green Party actually coming together with some center-right parties, so it's possible, but in the UK, I think that seems like a stranger coalition. And of course, the rise of the far right and the AfD really with some horrifying language, which I'm sure Susie will bring in.
The idea that anybody can vote in people who don't see anything really too wrong with what the Nazis did is sort of astonishing. But it's got here in the front of The Guardian, the co-founder of the AfD, a chap called Alexander Gauland, who says we will take our people and our country back, which kind of begs the question, well, who had your people and where are they? And what exactly do you think you're taking them back? Our people? Do you mean our race? Do you mean your blood? Somehow, what you're taking our people back is an astonishing thing to say. And Gauland has previously said that Germany should celebrate the Nazi military past as well. So he's an astonishing person. But I think there's a lot of focus going on the AfD's rise, which is astonishing and different. But Frau Merkel has not had a massive failure here. She has still managed what is in the German system a pretty good showing at the polls.
And her fourth.
Which is astonishing. She's on a fourth term as a female premier in the West. She's
unofficial leader of the world, leader of the free world.
Unofficial,
yes, many have called her.
No one else is doing it, let's face it. And she's done pretty well. The socialist, the left in Germany, has slumped to their worst ever result, which is perhaps why the far right's success is a little bit more marked. And what's interesting as well is the suggestion that a lot of Frau Merkel's more conservative, well, she's a conservative anyway, but her very conservative voters have gone with the AfD when they are actually in Parliament. When that Parliament is formed and Parliament starts happening, we've seen this with UKIP here. When someone votes for a particular single issue for a party, UKIP got 4 million votes, remember, when they actually start seeing that party in Parliament and in power, in local authorities and so on, they start seeing other things and other policies, they start to realise that the one issue they voted for, they may not share the same attitude on lots of other issues, and they start to back away. And that's what's happened with the UKIP vote in the UK. It's not just Brexit that killed it off, it's UKIP itself. And you may find the same thing with the far right in Germany. They've only got 13% of the vote. They're not in a position
According
to actually,
to the exit poll, yeah.
so far, but they're not in a position, if that is true, to actually start influencing laws too much. They'll get the screen time and they'll be able to badger her, but they won't be a big drain.
It's interesting. I think that so many people were saying that this election would be about the 1-point-something million migrants that have been allowed in through Germany, particularly refugees. And I'm not sure that there's actually a clear answer on that, because while the far right have done somewhat better, like you say, she has not lost. And she's been so strong in her position that Germany and Europe must be open to migrants coming in, looking for a safe haven and looking for a new place to start life. And she hasn't lost. So I think that question is still a bit up in the air.
OK, let's move to politics closer to home. And a couple of the front pages are still preoccupied with what's going on inside the government and inside the cabinet, particularly over Brexit. The Metro's lead story, PM tries to keep lid on revolt. So who's revolting?
Who isn't?
Yeah,
The Conservative
everyone.
Party. This is what the Conservative Party's been doing about Europe for approximately 40 years, and they see no reason to stop just because we voted to leave the damn thing. So there's suggestions that 50 or 30 Tory MPs want Theresa to go. That's not enough to actually force her out, so that's not an issue. Although it may be more of an issue for her at Tory party conference when that starts, because she needs to try and appease the grassroots. And then we've got on the front of the eye David Davis and his plan to become Prime Minister, which is charming. I really would wish that he had a plan for Brexit, which is kind of what his job is. And of course, you can't forget the brilliant description of Dominic Cummings, the former Leave campaign director, who said he was thick as mince, vain as a narcissus and lazy as a toad, which makes him an absolutely ideal candidate for Prime Minister. And I don't think, we were saying earlier on, nobody wants the job of Prime Minister. I'm
Not
sure
right now.
Theresa May doesn't want the job of Prime Minister right now. She is going to be the whipping boy. She's getting the blame for everything that goes wrong. What's happening here, I think, is that everyone else in her cabinet wants to get the credit for things they can take credit for, but they don't want the blame. They don't want the actual job of being where the buck stops.
I don't disagree with that. I think a lot of people would love to see Brexit happen and then get to take the reins back to domestic policy issues. But in the meantime, a lot of those domestic policy issues are being ignored. And people like Boris Johnson, Amber Rudd, Philip Hammond, they have a real duty to what's happening in this country. Yes, also abroad, especially Boris. But they really do have a duty to be tackling the deficit, dealing with Homeland Security, dealing with Home Office issues. And a lot of that is getting ignored because of Brexit. So they need to be thinking about their own legacies over the next few years, I would certainly say. I think the other important point is that apparently in this lead story on the Eye, one of David Davis's way of becoming Prime Minister is that he's ordered his supporters to avoid conflict with Downing Street, which goes to what you were saying, which is that this is not some massive coup. This is not some cryptic takeover. I mean, everyone is playing nice, at least on the surface for now.
Well, meanwhile, you mentioned Boris Johnson. Obviously, he's been accused of jostling for position as well, and he features on the front of the Daily Telegraph. Someone is saying that he's simple-minded on Brexit. Who's
This is Chancellor Philip Hammond's supporters. Boris's side and Philip's side do not like one another. They
have different visions of Brexit.
They have different visions of Brexit. And this is exactly what I was talking about. Neither of those two, if they were given the job of Prime Minister tomorrow, would particularly want to grab it with both hands. But while the Prime Minister is sitting there taking the blame for things, they are quite happy to say, well, look, Philip Hammond would say, look, he needs to think about the business side of things. He's thinking about a long-term transition and the economy. He's being practical and pragmatic. Boris is being too simple. And Boris, after his article, 4,000-word diatribe last week, his supporters were saying, now, look, he's managed to get the 5-year transition that Hammond wanted down to 2 years. They're both trying to claim credit for the success that hasn't happened yet, but which they are imagining might happen. And they're positioning themselves as to what side or kind or type of Brexit they think they're going to get. It's madness. They're all just, there's no other way of saying it but willy-waving.
Well, there is madness, but to see the wood through the trees in some respect, I think there's a very important point to be taken away here. When we're talking about like political capital, as we were saying earlier, but also it isn't simply that it was called simple-minded Boris, it was simple-minded Brexiteers. And there is still this fight going on within the Conservatives, but certainly within the UK as a whole, about how they're going to go about dealing with Remainers versus Brexiteers. We're seeing it on that political level, but we're also seeing it in day-to-day life. And a lot of people will be supporting Boris Johnson in the fact that he supposedly got it from 5 years to 2 years, because they just want to see it happen.
Although they denied that there was ever a plan for it.
Of course, they do, but, you know, supposedly. But they just want to see it happen. And I think so often the public can get tired and stressed. They re-elected David Cameron with a majority, simply saying, we appreciate that you're taking care of the economy, we somewhat agree with austerity, and then so quickly, just a few years down the line, that can turn if you don't use your political capital when you need to. And I think here, the cabinet only has so long to get Brexit done. People will get tired of it. I mean, I think the commentariat's getting tired of talking about it, but people at home will get tired of listening to it as well. So there is something to be said about moving this forward, because you only have the public on your side, on either side, for so long.
And the last vote from the public was an instruction to compromise. A hung parliament says you
really
need
unclear.
to find the middle ground. There is no hard, there is no soft, there is the middle that makes everybody happy, which of course is impossible. But that's what the instruction was.
But in the meantime, you don't see there being a chance of a leadership election anytime soon, despite what appears to be kind of jostling for position.
I cannot make a call on that, although I mean, what I would say is I do not think that Theresa May can make it as Prime Minister until the UK has left the European Union. I think that will be incredibly
They're jostling
difficult.
to be Prime Minister after Theresa has fallen on her sword. They're not jostling for her job.
Right, exactly. But could there be a leadership election before the UK leaves? I think that's certainly possible.
OK, well, we're going to take a break right now. We've got lots more to talk about after it, including will we see Meghan by Harry's side at the Invictus Games? We'll be talking about that in a moment. Welcome back to the press preview. With me tonight, Fleet Street Fox Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and Kate Andrews, news editor at the Institute of Economic Affairs. And we're going to talk about an issue that it makes the front page of The Guardian. It's actually just the picture at the top there, and I think there's another article on the front of the Telegraph as well. And this is the taking a knee, I think, is the kind of hashtag that it's been called, which is a protest that's been going on at NFL games. I think it's even spreading into other sports as well, against what the players see as racial injustice, and Donald Trump's not happy.
So for a little while now, major players at NFL games have been taking the knee during the national anthem, and the goal has been to give highlight to the Black Lives Matter movement, or not even the direct movement, but the violence usually against black men, often committed by the police. This is, in my opinion, a patriotic thing to do. You have every right to the freedom of speech in America, and if you want, you don't have to stand for the pledge, you don't have to take the pledge. That is a right that you have as a free citizen of the United States. Donald Trump, unknowingly why, decided to push back on this before the protests were even about him. Of course, now it has escalated, so more NFL players are taking the knee to protest Donald Trump himself, and it's happened here in London at Wembley because the NFL is in town. Donald Trump has previously in the past tweeted things like you should be allowed to burn the American flag. Now, I'm not going to do that. I personally don't think it's a nice thing to do, but I certainly think, again, you have the right as an individual to make that kind of statement. It's a storm in a teacup, and Donald Trump's created it, and what else is new? Yeah,
well, it's not one of those dead cats that he's just thrown out to distract people. Well, you know, there's other stuff happening that no one's talking about, so let's just, you know, stir this up a bit. And he's using epithets to describe these players, which I won't repeat on television, but basically calling their mothers into question. For the fact that their sons are doing this, calling them losers. These are all people who, if they were to get into a scrap with Donald Trump, I think he would probably lose. But, you know, they've got every right to do it. He's distracting in what he's doing there. But if we could just stop calling it football, that would be great, because it's not.
You're not going to win that campaign.
It's rugby for girls.
Not going to win that campaign.
The reason I was looking down here at my computer is that Donald Trump has been talking tonight to the pool, the group of reporters that follow him around, and he's talked about the national anthem boycott. He says it has nothing to do with race. Instead, it's about respect for our country. But it looks like he's not backing down, just scanning what he's
Look, I think that there are...
They're paying perfect respect. They're not turning their backs. They're not pulling faces. They're not being disrespectful. They're standing for the
Black Lives Matter movement.
For the Black Lives Matter movement, and they're standing. They normally would stand for the anthem, and instead they're just going to take to one knee, and, you know, which is a gesture of respect, isn't it, to go down on one knee to somebody?
And you know, to be honest, we could debate whether or not there are other things they can do, but particularly for young black boys at home to see these these black players down on one knee and some white players in solidarity with them is a good image. It's the right image.
Millions of sports watchers as well. I won't say football fans.
Exactly, it's the right image. And, you know, again, Trump, why? But
OK.
we have that conversation enough.
OK, let's move on to a double-page spread inside the Mirror, which has caught your attention. It's the Labour conference, of course, and it looks like John McDonnell has come up with a proposal, and this is all about debt.
Yes, John McDonnell in his speech tomorrow is going to vow to cap interest payments on credit card debt. His goal, a very noble one, is to tackle the debt issue that the United Kingdom has. Apparently, we haven't been in as much debt since the time of the Napoleonic Wars. So that's a fun stat for you. So he's on the right track, but this is absolutely not the way to tackle it. There are going to be a lot of consequences for individuals and for the economy as a whole if he decides to cap interest payments in this way, particularly if you start to go after legitimate credit card companies and you bring in this cap and they're less likely to loan out to you because of it, then you're going to drive those people who are already in a desperate situation towards loan sharks.
But is it not true that there are some companies that are taking advantage of desperate people, lending them money but at very, very high interest rates?
There are interest rates across the board, and as we were discussing before, some of them are very competitive, so you can shop around and find the lowest interest rate. If you cap it, all of a sudden, there is no market in this situation, and people are just likely not to take out the money altogether.
And what you have to find if you introduce a cap is that it's not the floor, it becomes it's not the ceiling, it becomes the floor. If you see what I mean? Everyone suddenly says, well, if we can charge twice what someone's borrowed, then that's what we're all going to do, and it's the same with energy prices and everything else. But the issue with the debt we've got in this country is that the people who are doing high-risk lending to those who have poor credit ratings, companies like that have started to fold recently. They've started to have credit problems of their own, and the reason for that is because they cannot guarantee getting all their debt repaid when they service it. So if I borrow £5,000 from a credit card company on a no-interest credit card, on a balance transfer, if I pay that all back in time, I don't have to pay any interest on it. So I've got that money effectively for free. The company that has loaned me that cash has suffered as a result of it.
Taken the hit.
They've got a customer, but they haven't gained anything from it. So it's when you pay back, it's when you switch transfer deals and things like that, and it's the people who are giving high-risk debt that is the massive issue, and John McDonnell should really be concentrating on that.
OK, let's move on finally. We did promise we'd talk about Meghan Markle. I think mainly so that we could look at this headline on the Metro. He's Meghan-ized her.
Yep, and the Telegraph's got Markle sparkles.
Yeah.
I've just had to explain to Kate who Meghan Markle is.
And I really appreciated
She's American. She's the closest thing you've got to a royal family.
American.
Is she American?
No, I'm American. I said Meghan who, not representative of my great country, which really is in love with the royal family.
Basically, two people have sat in the same football stadium, and the newspapers are treating this as though suddenly they're getting married.
You would think that the new royal baby would have been enough, but
yeah.
Apparently this is, the hot topic of the day.
Indeed, but we won't discuss it any further, but we might revisit it at 11:30 when you'll both be back. For the moment, Susie and Kate, thanks very much.